What is happening, Blades? And welcome back to the Blades Ramble. I've got a very special guest today. Somebody who, to my knowledge, doesn't do many interviews, so I'm delighted to get him on. It's somebody you'll all be familiar with through local radio, doing football heaven and everything related to Sheffield sport, really. So really excited, as I've said, to welcome to the Blades Ramble, Rob Staton. Rob, welcome, mate.
Oh, cheers for the invite, pal. Really appreciate it. It makes a change to be asked questions rather than asking them. So yeah, really happy to be here.
Yeah, I thought it'd be nice to get to know you a little bit, the man that asks the questions rather than always be the man that's asking. So let's start. Tell us a bit about your background. Are you a Sheffield lad? You're obviously from the area, but is it Sheffield you're from, or what's your background, mate?
So I'm from Rotherham, and I've spent most of my life in Rotherham. I went to university, and when I finished university, I actually moved to Canada and lived in Canada for a while, and then came back and settled in Rotherham again, and have been here ever since. So it's kind of I've been in Rotherham most of my life, and apart from that, Vancouver. So those two places that are very similar, obviously Vancouver and Rotherham. So
absolutely synonymous.
But I love this part of the world. I've worked away from the region, but this is the only place for me. This is the only place I want to be, really.
Yeah, because you spent a bit of time with was it Radio Humberside when?
Yeah, so about 5 years ago, I was the sports editor at Humberside and the TV side and Look North over there, because they have a Look North, their version of Look North, and I did that for a while. Then I went to Look North at Leeds, then I went back to Hull, and then I eventually came back to Radio Sheffield. So and will hopefully be at Radio Sheffield for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know. I'm certainly a big fan of what you do, and I know a lot of our viewers and listeners will be as well. So that might not always come out on places like social media, because that brings out the worst in a lot of people. Yeah, and we'll get to that. We can get to that, mate. So the fact that you're a Rotherham boy, does that make you a Miller?
Obviously I knew you were going to ask the question on who do you support, which is, do you know what? About 10 years ago, you get asked. It was the question that everybody asked, and fewer and fewer people ask it these days. I don't know what's changed with that, but I can remember sort of in the supermarket getting stopped, and people just saying, "Who do you support? Who does Seth support? Who does Gid support?" all the time, and that was always like a big question. And I can honestly say, I'm not just saying this as a cop-out answer. It's just not a part of my life. The minute that you become a journalist, at least I think so, the minute that you say that you are going to go into journalism and you want to do that as your career, that part of your life just goes. And look, you have to fill the void. You have to have something to root for. So I'm in the England Travel Club, so I will go and watch England games home and away when I can get a ticket. Like they're playing Scotland this week, and I've not got enough caps to get a ticket for that game, but I would have happily gone and done that. If work was allowing me to, I'd have gone to Poland to watch them play Ukraine. So that's filled a big void for me. I'm a very passionate England fan. I love England cricket and England rugby, and that's filled a void for me. When I was in Vancouver, I used to take the mick out of people who like the NFL, and I went to one game and became hooked on it. And I follow an NFL team, the local team from where I was based, and that has filled the void for me, because if you are going to go and ask questions and cover these teams and do all of that, I don't think you can do that job properly if you are also a card-carrying fan of one of the clubs. You just can't. And I know people will go, "Oh yeah, whatever," and half the people think I'm a Wednesday fan, and half think I'm a Rotherham fan. And do you know what? There are even some people who think I'm a die-hard Blade on the blue side of Sheffield. So it's just not. Hand on heart, it's not a part of me, of my life. My job is a lot easier when all the teams are doing well, so I kind of root for the easy life in that regard. But there are also fun aspects to when things are going wrong, and you get to be a bit mischievous as a journalist.
That's true. We'll get to some of that as well, I think. I completely understand that sort of way of thinking, really, because my dad was a professional scout for several years, scouting for the first team at Everton, and he worked at Chelsea and things like that. And when you're with that team, like Radio Sheffield is essentially your team now, isn't it? But in the football world, he's obviously a card-carrying Blade. There's no doubt about it. He's a Blade through and through. But when he was working for Everton, you have that professionalism, don't you, I suppose, that overrides whatever feel you may have gone to Rotherham as a kid or wherever it might have been. But ultimately, like Chris Morgan was a big Barnsley fan, came to Sheffield United, had a long time at Sheffield United. You could arguably say he's a blade now. He probably looks out for both, but
without doubt, this is the thing. You know, players face this a lot as well, because they will have grown up. They might have supported a team, or it might have been that they had a favourite player who inspired them and they'd follow them instead, or whatever it was. Yeah. But then they go into a job, which is what being a footballer is, or being a journalist is.
Yeah.
And that part of you can't exist as much anymore. Now, look, it can in certain extent, because Gids can't wait to tell everybody that he's a massive Halifax fan. I mean, he never goes and watches them play, but he loves to tell you he's a Halifax fan because he thinks that no one will give a toss. Like, he thinks that everyone will just be sat there thinking, oh, good old Gids is a Halifax fan. You know, there's nothing offensive about being a Halifax fan. But then, you know, they're a National League team. You know, they play in the Dog and Duck League. I'm joking. And nobody's threatened by Halifax, so he can afford to say it. But look, he doesn't. If Halifax were playing Sheffield United or Sheffield Wednesday or whatever, he would be treating that broadcast as if they were playing in somebody else. Like there's just that's how it is. So there are some times, like if at the age of 20 I'd moved to London or something and ended up working at Radio London instead, I'm sure that I could have potentially gone around saying, you know, I support this team or whatever, and people would have gone, well, who cares? It's not Chelsea, it's not Arsenal, it's not Spurs, so we're not offended by that. But but when you are actually in the patch that you live in, I think it's very different. And the other thing I'd say to that is, I think you want local people covering your club. I think you do anyway. I
agree.
You've got to understand
the culture.
The culture, what the place is about. You know, I think this is quite a unique patch for sport. Having worked in a couple of others, and I do think there's a benefit to being from around here. So there are trades off with that. You know, if you want people who have never sort of been part of the local football scene, so that you can never accuse them, you know, of silly biases which now exist, then fine. But then you're going to lose some of that ability. Then they know what football around is all about, and I think it's in this patch especially, it's really important.
Yeah, I completely agree. People who understand not just the game, but understand what it means to the local community and things like that. So, and I think you do have a great balance of that, to be fair. Are we some of your favourite people to interview? I believe you were the, certainly in a Sheffield United context, you were the interviewer for the famous every 3 weeks I need my hair cut in. Were it you at Town Hall with Wilder? I thought it was. So who are some of your favourite people to interview?
Well, Chris Wilder was fantastic. You know, and I think the thing about the good thing I think about Chris Wilder is that he gave good answers. He was a great personality, but he also kept you on your toes because, you know, I think there was always a chance that Chris would have a go back or something like that, and I quite like that. You know, I think, you know, some of these interviews where you go out and you know, I won't name any names, but some of these managers are terribly boring or just talking cliches. You know, you just come out afterwards and you think, well, that was a waste of time. But you never had that with Chris. So I think he was fantastic. He was somebody I love to interview. Paul Warne, because you know, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn. You know, Warney, I think he'd rather not talk. He'd talk about anything other than football, really. So, you know, a question on a formation or set piece or something, he'd find quite banal, quite boring. But if you asked him something a bit off the hook, you know, you'd usually get a fantastic answer. Like his answers about how much he loves Christmas were kind of legendary amongst journalists. Do you know, I actually quite enjoyed Steve Evans. You know, he's an interesting bloke, isn't he? But
I worked for Steve Evans at Rotherham. Yeah, he's an interesting bloke. Yeah,
you'll know all about it. But I have to say, he was good as gold with the press. Like, I will say, like, I used to go to his office to do the press conference, and you knew that you were gonna come away with something. Like, he was gonna say something interesting in that press conference that you would be a talking point. I can remember there was one show once where he said, just ask the fans they can text in or ring in a question and I'll text you my answer. So for the whole hour, Rotherham fans just going, are we going to sign Akin Fenworth? Was somebody asked, and I said, so I put it out there, and Steve texted me and said, something like too old, too fat, or something. I don't know what it was. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, it was not complimentary, and it was fantastic. You know, I thought he was I thought from a press point of view, strictly from my experience, it was entertaining. And oh God, there's so many others. There's some great players out there that you build bonds with and you really enjoy interviewing. Ronnie Moore's another one that I always enjoyed interviewing. I thought Ronnie was fantastic. But do you know what one of my favourite ones was? Sean O'Driscoll, because he was a right pain in the backside to interview. He was a real pain, because I can remember it was my second job at Radio Sheffield, was to be the Donny reporter, and I was bricking it. The sort of taking over that job strictly because of interviewing him. Because if you asked him a question and you worded it incorrectly, you could easily get a one-word answer out of him. And so I can remember going down pitch side and they'd been hammered by QPR, and I can remember standing there nervous as hell because I didn't know what he was going to say. And I was like, "So Sean, what do you think of that?" Thought we were fantastic today. And I'm sat there thinking, I don't know what to ask because they were bloody awful. And he's saying they're fantastic, and I don't know how to deal with it. Short of just going, I disagree with you, Sean. There, I thought you were rubbish. What can you say? Like he was quite a clever tactic, I guess, because he. But then on other times, you go down pitch side and Doncaster had passed another team off the pitch, and you'd be thinking, wow, people used to call them like the Arsenal of like the Championship because they played such great football. And you go down and they'd battered Preston or something at Deepdale, and you go down there thinking, what a performance that was, and he'd go, "But we were awful today. He didn't do this and he didn't do that. And we should have done that better. And we should have done this." And again, you thought, I honestly have no idea where to go with this because I've just watched one of the best performances I've seen in ages, and he's saying it was awful. So it was a lesson that I definitely needed in whenever that was, 2010 or whenever when I started doing that. 2009, 2010, I think it was. And yeah, a great experience. And do you know, I spent years. I thought interviewing was one of my weakest things. So when you sort of get to interview people like that, it's a good lesson for you.
Oh, very good. How, with that in mind, then, and you create these positive relationships with people and things like that, but it's also your job to sort of represent the fan base and things of that nature in the questions that you ask. How hard is it to balance that? I don't want to be rude, but I have to ask these intrusive questions, and you're probably going to get an unfavourable response if a manager's under pressure or something of that nature. How difficult is it to pose those questions when they need asking, but it's not going to go down well that you're asking them?
It's harder now because I think 10 years ago you would know the managers a bit more, like there'd be a bit more of a relationship there. For whatever reason within football, that's changed. Like you don't often speak to the managers at all outside of press conferences, so you don't really get to know each other. I won't name the manager, but it was a long time ago. I can remember, speaking to a manager and saying, if you lose this game, I am going to have to ask you about your job, and that's coming. And and he said, yeah, I get it. And that was fine. And they did lose, and I did have to ask that question. And that's the kind of thing you can do to maintain relationships, but also be ready to sort of ask the difficult questions sometimes. That never happens now. Like that, you just gotta. So you don't know how a manager's going to react to that. Obviously, we haven't. It wasn't a question about his job, but we haven't spoken to Paul Cook at Chesterfield for well over a year now, because he was unhappy with an interview that I did, and that's sort of one example. I think we asked Darren Moore some especially difficult questions towards the end of last season when Sheffield Wednesday obviously lost the first leg of the playoffs to Peterborough 4-0, and the fans were saying you're not fit to wear the shirt. You've got to ask certain questions there, and in fairness to Darren Moore, I thought he always took it on with a great deal of grace, and understood, I think, where we were all coming from. And you've kind of got to do your job. So it can go either way. And really right now, you kind of don't know which way that's going to go, because you don't have the same kind of connections you do with managers that you used to have. And does it make it difficult? No, because I personally think you've got to be prepared to ask those questions. I think you've got to do it. I think you aren't doing your job if you're not out there asking some of those questions. And I think managers should expect difficult questions. Press conferences are not supposed to be a tea party. They're supposed to be an opportunity for journalists to poke around a little bit and probe and push and try and get some answers. And I think we've kind of forgotten that to some extent. I think people, a number of times now where there's like a something's like a team's on a losing run and you're pushing probe, and somebody, the reaction on social media is to accuse you of some kind of agenda or something like that. I'm thinking, no, this is just a job. This is what you've got to do. And this, we're not fans, we're not mates. We're there to do a job.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And that sort of leads me on to social media, I suppose. And nothing prepares you really for the abuse, essentially, that comes your. I mean, as a blade, you nail your colours to the mast and you take anything that you can. It's rare. I've been very lucky. I don't get a lot of blades coming after me, but you get fans of other clubs, commenting on your videos and stuff of that nature. But for me, it's been very low level. For yourself and your colleagues who are trying to be impartial, but as you say, you'll get stopped and accused of being an owl, a blade, a miller, everything. How difficult is it to then, because these faceless profiles, or even those that are daft enough to put their name to it, that come after you, it's quite aggressive. I saw last week that you'd had some stick for something that I thought was just completely out of order, and you're doing your job. As you've just said yourself, it's a job. I have to ask these questions. I have to do this sort of digging. And you've also got your own opinion, believe it or not. Like it on the Wednesday red card. I don't watch a lot of their stuff, I'll be honest, but there was something that you were quite strong on, and people just going at you for stuff. And I think, how do you deal with that on a day-to-day basis?
It doesn't bother me at all, really. I mean, I think it probably did a lot when I was younger, but I can remember when I was about 13 watching Nightmare on Elm Street and being terrified, and then watching the rest of the Nightmare on Elm Street films after that and not being terrified, because you kind of become desensitized to it. And I think that's part of it. I can remember this one time somebody sent me a screen grab. I'll never forget this. A screen grab of a notepad, and it said at the top of the notepad, "To kill list. Number 1, Rob Staton. Number 2, Rob Staton's family." And they tweeted it to me. They just sent it to me on Twitter. And I just think, what possesses somebody to do something like that? Like, you could, if you think I'm an arse, like, that's fine. I don't expect everybody to agree with me or to like me even. Like, I don't. It is part of the job. I mean, you are, if you're talking about football every day, if you are covering 6 clubs who are all kind of like nosy neighbours, they're all kind of like peering over the fence to like see what's going on next door, even though like they all deny it. Like, the number of times, I don't know, like Wednesday play Rotherham and Wednesday fans go, "It's not a derby, we don't care," but they do care. They care. They care about Rotherham and stuff like that. So it is what it is. So you when you live in that world, you've got to sort of expect some stick. I also think if you're not really doing the job properly, if you're not running the risk of somebody calling you an arse on Twitter, like if you're not sort of prepared to ask the questions, if you're not prepared to sort of go on a phone in and have a really strong discussion with somebody on a topic, an important topic, then what are we doing here? Do people just want sort of the radio hosts and the journalists to just be shy and retire and never say anything, never say boo to a goose, never do all of that? And sort of my policy on Twitter is, if somebody comes and has a go at us, I'll engage them. I think it's I don't want to be a faceless Twitter account.
Absolutely not.
I probably wasted so much time bickering back and forth with people on Twitter that I should be spending it with my kids or doing something more productive, like staring at the wall. But I do think it's important to sort of engage, discuss, and feel like people can have a chat with you. Now, I'm probably a bit quick on the trigger with the block button, but I think as soon as people start getting insulting or they make it personal, I ain't got any time for that. If someone come up to me in the street and said, "I think you've got it wrong about that red card that Fred Onyedinma got at Rotherham against Blackburn," I'd happily go, "Well, go on, then what do you think?" And then we could have but the minute they start going, "You're biased," or you deserve to be sacked," or pick your 4-letter swear word, I'd be like, "No, mate, you can't. I'm not having that. I'm not going to talk to you." But so on Twitter, that's how I kind of approach it. I think there are a lot of people out there who are affected by it, though. I think that it's and sometimes I think you've just got to turn a blind eye and ignore it, and or whatever. But I also think sometimes there are people out there who I would just plead with them, like, you wouldn't want someone to send that to you, so don't send it to another person. Like, let's just be nicer to each other. There's no. It is a bit of a cesspit sometimes, and I think it's destroyed our culture, social media, in a number of ways. And I just think this inability to accept other people's opinions and and be prepared to have a discussion, and then have that sort of mentality. But we can still have a pint at the end of it. That seems to have gone out the window.
Exactly. I mean, isn't that what social media is about? Expressing yourself and sort of interacting with other people, but you don't have to be nasty. I mean, I'm not even a year on the platform. It's coming up to a year that I've been on YouTube, and I've had no training or anything like that in terms of what to expect. Everybody's been great, and everybody that I've come across has been really helpful. But I didn't know how to take abuse on social media. But I always find that being genuine with what you're thinking, and you're not doing it to be nasty, but some people will definitely disagree with some of the things you're saying. I'm not talking, I don't agree with things like Adrian Durham. People would, I'm not saying you feel like this, but some people would say they just do it for shock value and just try and get a talking point going. I'd never want to be thought of in that way, because it's not how I want to operate. But I also don't want to be a fence sitter that's never seen to have an opinion either way, because I do have strong feelings on my team and I do want to talk about it. And fair play to you as a journalist if that's something that you also want to add to your presentation and have that debate with people, but in a healthy way.
Well, we've got a radio show, you know, and you're right. The aim of the radio show is not to chuck out a grenade and sort of watch everybody, you know, react to it. I mean, that is there's a lot of that in the media now, especially in America. Actually, you know, in like American sports, they just have these professional provocateurs, really, who will argue with each other on a program. It gets clipped for Twitter, and everybody just has a meltdown about it. That's become like sports media to a large extent, and look, you see it a bit over here. But I still think that, you know, if we just sort of started our show every day and said, right, come on then, let's talk about who had the best throw in this weekend, or like, you know, just something really. People aren't going to engage in it. You know, sometimes you've got to be prepared to have, you know, an honest discussion about something that isn't right, and often that's like officiating, or it's a manager's decision making, or it's a particular reaction to a result, or a manager losing his job, or maybe a manager should be, whatever it is. And it's not to paint any of us as experts. We're not. We're just essentially, you know, football fans who are now hosting a radio show. But I do think that's sort of, we are hosting a radio show at the end of the day. We want to have good debates. We want to have an entertaining show. We want to put stuff out there that people want to listen to. So, and I think on social media, it's just an extension of that. You know, I think it's a platform. It's like it does sort of create this sort of 24-hour cycle of debate, and I like that. And I have no problem arguing, if you want to call it that, or debating, or even just having a conversation with people on Twitter. I always will chat to people on Twitter, but just as soon as you get to like personal stuff, or accusing me of like not being good at my job, or sacked or stuff like this, I think, come on, you know, what are we doing here? You know, this is not going to get us anywhere, is it?
You're not going to their manager, are you? Their employer, and saying, "Come on, look at what he's saying to me online."
It's the only thing we kind of have in common with footballers, and it really is the only thing, because they're obviously better in every other way, but and far more talented than we are. But it's that feeling that just, you know, there were 30,000 of us at a ground one day who thinks we could have put that shot away. There's also 30,000 people who think that that they could ask all the best questions and
that's right,
and stand there and do all of that stuff. So it's fine. I think it's the positives. I feel like I've got the best job in the world, so I won't change it for anything. And a bit of debate on Twitter is not gonna put us off. And I hope for the most part people do appreciate that we're just trying to be part of this. We just want to produce content for the fans, as I'm sure you're the same. You just want to go out there, do something that's going to give people, I think, football, and to an extent, I think we've lost this a little bit. Football should be a release. You know, life's crap enough as it is. You know, football should be a release, but that doesn't mean it has to be positive all the time. Because if something's not right with your club, it needs to be discussed. That's as much as a release as anything else. You can't just pretend that everything's great all the time, you know, when it comes to that release. But it's important to people. It matters in people's lives. It is the thing that helps them sort of unwind and switch off, and gives them that sort of bit of joy on a Saturday afternoon. So I think we need to remember that.
I've been very positive. I've obviously, in the last year, it's been nothing but an upward trajectory for United. So it's all been very positive from my end. And this season, only very briefly, but I've criticised certain Larucci essentially. But that lost me some subscribers, and you think, oh well, you know, that's interesting, but I'm certainly not going to change or not be honest about how I'm feeling. I just thought it's interesting to think that when you're not always 100% positive all the time, it will be divisive, which you can understand, but people will actually decide not to follow you because of that. So it's just
that's YouTube. That's the really interesting thing with YouTube, is that I've noticed with sport is that people do not like any kind of negativity. Like it's, I spend a lot of time on YouTube. I think it's a great platform, and I think a lot of I don't consider because it's a big thing now, isn't it? Sort of the new broadcasts that are popping up on YouTube for all of the different football clubs in the country. I think it's great because you're hearing from the fans. I think it's even great that sort of in some cases that chief execs, chairman, players, managers, or whatever are engaging in these things. I don't think it shouldn't just be us. I think it's quite good for the managers to be seen that they're willing to turn up and have a chat with some fans and in a public forum. I think it's fantastic. But what I have noticed, and not just with football, but my own passion for the NFL, is that people react very badly to even the most. You could say 10 positive things, but if you say one negative thing, people will go, you're just too negative, or you're going on about this again. And it's like, well, no, it's just an opinion. But I always think you've got to run the risk. Like, there's no one has ever achieved anything by just doing stuff that people always say is amazing. Like, you've got to run the risk of somebody calling you whatever to create anything. And sometimes you've just got to accept that there are people out there that are not going to like the cut of your jib, and they're going to think you're.
That's right. That's right.
So anyway, so it is what it is.
No, I completely agree. And you've sort of preempted one of my questions that I'm keen to ask you, really, in terms of what, and you have touched on it a little bit. What impacts do you think, in terms of your role as well, and the part you play in local media, do you think it's helped, hindered, complemented by fan channels? We do this for fun. Absolutely, it's certainly not. It's not lucrative in any way. But this is your bread and butter. But there are the odd things that I get out of the club, and I don't know whether that's due to your relationship with the club or whatever it might be. But how do you think it's called the Ramble for a reason, Rob? But how do you think they work alongside each other, fan channels and official media like yourselves?
I think they're great. Listen, I would happily. We're having a conversation today. I'd go on any of the clubs. I've been on the Barnsley ones. I've been on the Rotherham ones. I think I did a Wednesday one like about 3 years ago. I'm doing an Ipswich one next week, because they're playing Wednesday. So like I think they're great. I think they offer. I don't see us as competitors. I think it's like you put it. It's a compliment. It's everything. I think the more stuff that's out there, the better. I just think we're in the new world now where when I started growing up, if you wanted your football fix, local football fix, there was only Football Heaven. And I grew up listening to Football Heaven and Paul and Seth and Steve Houghton and Doug Chalmers and people like that. And it was all you had, that 1 hour. And if you had to have a radio, and you had to have it on between 6 and 7. And now, you can listen to our show whenever. You could listen to that on the train in the morning. You could listen to that at 10 o'clock. You could listen to our show, but then you could stick on a Blades pod or a YouTube show later in the evening. You could, when you commute and stuff like that. And I think the more the better. And I think these channels are really important because we cover 6 clubs. And I think it's good sometimes to sort of know what's going on with all the different clubs or get into big sort of broader topics. But I also think it's good to then have like an hour of Sheffield United chat where people who watch every game or watch most of the games or every home game or whatever it is that they do can get around and have a really good chat about that and get into stuff that we can't. And also speak in the way that fans can speak sometimes because, with the greatest respect, we can't go on Radio Sheffield and say certain things.
Criticise Larucci.
We can't use language that some maybe support. I'm not suggesting that all these fan things are out there effing and jeffing or anything like that. But they can speak like the man or woman on the terrace, let's say, or in the pub after the game, And I think there is a real place for that. So I think they work well in terms of relationships with the clubs. Obviously with the Sheffield United way, the Prince has done some interviews with them, and I think that's great. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. I do think that he did say a couple of things, like that he thinks that's kind of the future, and that sort of the mainstream media, if you want to call it that. And I still think that people who essentially run football clubs and represent the fans, I still think they should be prepared to answer questions from the media, and to be willing to go through that and be put on the spot about certain things. I think if you're a custodian of a football club, it's really important to do that. And I do think that an interview on a fan channel will naturally be different than an interview with a newspaper reporter or a radio reporter or a TV reporter who works for the BBC or the Sheffield Star or Yorkshire Live. It just naturally is going to be different. So I think I'd like to think that both things can exist and can happen, and will happen with Sheffield United Football Club in the future. And I know there's going to be an interview this week with Stephen Bettis, for example, that we're going to be doing. So I'm very much looking forward to that. And I can say that, I think all of the local media would say this, that we all feel like there's a good relationship with Sheffield United Football Club. I'd like to think we have a good relationship with all of the local football clubs. So I don't see any issues, any problems. And often, and this is the thing, we have a lot of the podcaster, YouTuber, fan channel people on our shows these days, because we think it's good. I think you get, especially because you've got people who like to have a chat, like yourself, like to get into it, about Sheffield United. Right. Will come on and you're well versed in, and you've got clarity and thought. So it's good to talk to you people.
Sometimes. So, have you any funny stories about like club relationships or anything like that? Where obviously we'll go with historic rather than current, just in case we're avoiding any sort of difficult conversation.
I mean, I have got a lot of stories. Like there are, do you know what? One day I will sit down and write a book and or something, and the 10 people who buy it will have a right laugh, because there's some stuff that I can't say that just happened over there. I mean, in terms of covering the clubs, let me think. I mean, like there was sort of the minor stuff. This is the really sort of safe stuff. I can remember there was this one time at Donny where it was raining, so we couldn't do the press conference outside. And then we went into this at County Park. They've got like this room where the players eat, and we went there, and all the players were eating, so we couldn't do it there because there was too much noise. And then we went up to the office, with the manager's office, and that was being used by, I don't know, the under-21 manager or something to do presentation. And then so it was like, well, where can we go? There's nowhere to go and do this press conference. And Dean Saunders was the manager. And he said, well, let's do it in there. And Steve Utley, bless him, he's not with us anymore. He said, what, in the toilet, in the gents? He was like, yeah, come on, go in the gents and the press conference. So we've got in here, and we're all stood in this. I mean, like now you film everything. Imagine filming that. And we're all stood there. There's me and like about 4 others. And he was
urinal.
And I'm leading the press conference. Dean, like, what's your team news? Your injury news? And he's like, yeah, no. And his first answer, the urinal started flushing. It's just like this really loud flush. And I just absolutely pissed myself laughing. And like everyone was laughing. It was ridiculous. And Dean Saunders said, you'll never work for Luck North, will you? Because and it was just, you had to be there. It was just such a ridiculous setting. The interview was interrupted by flushing urinals. And there's also, I mean, look, I've many an interview, when interviews used to happen at training grounds more, they don't so much since COVID these days. A lot of it's Zoom and stuff like that. But many an interview would be interrupted by a player doing something inappropriate in the background. I've seen all sorts of things revealed and swung around. There was this one time Carlos Cavalial came out, like there's at Wednesday they have like again, it's on Zoom now, but in their press room, it's kind of like a stage, and then there's the seats in front of it. And this one time, it was around Christmas, the door just crept open, and Carlos Cavalial poked his head out, and all of a sudden he pulled out this knife. And it's like, and he's waving it at us, like at all the press, like as if he's going to come and attack us. And he's like, oh, and then he just, as he's come through the door, he's pulled out a cake. And he got a Portuguese cake, and he was putting it up for everybody to have at Christmas time. But it was quite
Different.
funny. And there's many a story of journalists and Chris Wilder, when Zoom suddenly became a thing, you know, the way that Chris Wilder used to introduce his Zooms was hilarious with everybody. And oh my word, there are so many. Honestly, I have loved every single minute of doing this job. It's you're just surrounded by your mates. It's a good job. I wish there'd been more success on the pitch over the last 15 years, but last year was pretty good, so I guess we can always cling on to that.
It was.
Yeah, but lots of great stories, but sadly, I don't think many of them I can share.
No, that's okay. Understandable as well. Rob, thank you so much. I've got some quick questions from our Ramblers, and then I'm going to let you go. Thank you again for your time. Really appreciate it. So Dave says, and again, you've sort of alluded to the fact that you're not as close to the clubs and the personnel that you have been in the past, but do you know how Eki feels currently, and particularly in relation to the Illiman and Sander departures, maybe the takeover? We know he's good with the media, and he sort of gives the official party line to yourselves every time, and everybody knows he's doing that. But do we know how he really feels about things? Has he been frustrated? Is he understood? Anything that you've heard in relation to that?
I mean, I've never had a conversation with him, and if I had, it would be probably inappropriate to share that conversation here. But I can only have a guess from where I've been in the press conferences and watched the other ones he's done. I'd be surprised if he wasn't a little bit frustrated. The first few games of the season almost seem to have been like pre-season, but in the Premier League. So you were kind of the first game. You often talk about cobbling a team together, but that was a cobbled together team for the first game of the Premier League. You know, I was sat there watching it on Match of the Day that night, and I'm thinking, and they put the team up at the, and you're thinking, wow, you know, how? And
I know.
And then, you know, they've that's carried on. I mean, even like in the most recent game against Everton, do you know what? The players have come in and players have got back to health, but that's, you know, Cameron Archer's had 5 minutes at the club. Like ideally he has, you know, a couple of pre-season games at least, and like a bit of time to settle in and gel. So I think the timing as well, you know, the fact that if Illiman, there was always a chance that Illiman and Giant Sandberg were going to leave, but if you kind of just get on with it, and also even if it happens when it happens, you kind of got to, surely you've got to be ready to go, you know, to get players in very quickly afterwards, after that's happened. And it seemed like it took a long time. So I would be surprised if he's not frustrated, but I also wouldn't be surprised if he's not lingering on that now. Like it's done. It is what it is. There's no point dwelling on that. You know, August's finished now. The transfer window's finished. In fairness to Sheffield United, I think they have brought in some good players. And I don't know about you, but sort of looking at the bottom end of the Premier League, and I'm thinking there's a lot of shambolic teams in the bottom of this league, and I personally fancy United to stay up, because I think that they will have something, you know, I think they'll have character and spirit and competitiveness, and they've added some quality now, and I think there'll be no airs and graces about who they are, and they'll be together and united under the staff who are great. And I think that there's probably a few other teams who wish they had a bit of that.
Well, you've ruined my last question, but but I'll just finish off with a couple of Ramblers questions, and then I'll have to think of a new one quickly. Stephen asks, the injuries to the squad, do we think it's in relation to Eki's training methods potentially? What's your thoughts on, because he's had previous injury records at Leeds and Hibs, and Stephen's interested to know whether you think that could be linked to our current injury issues at the minute. I think we've got double figures players injured again at the club.
I'm sure that if he was sat with us now, he would push back on that greatly. I don't know, because I'm definitely not an expert on training methods and injury prevention or anything like that.
No, me
so
neither.
I can't really speak to whether or not. But what I will say is that whatever there is, there is an issue that needs to be rectified. There, there have been way too many injuries. Now, whether it is the training ground, whether it's, I don't know what it is, but that has to be rectified. There's just too many injuries. But then what I will say is that I think I don't know what it is. Maybe this is a total tangent. I don't know. Maybe football has actually gone too far. Like back in the day, Ronaldo stood out because he had a 6-pack and ate raw fish for dinner every day or whatever, and looked like an Adonis. They all look like that now. They all look fantastic. They're all like absolute machines, aren't they? In terms of physical behavior, there's no Mick Quinns in the league. Remember when he scored that hat-trick on the opening day against Arsenal and did a belly flop, and he's got a gut. I mean,
no Neil Chipley's about, are there anymore?
Yeah. I mean, there were legitimately players who were, I don't know, 4 pints in before before you got home, like after the game. So that the game's changed. It really has changed, and I just wonder sometimes whether or not maybe that just puts a lot of wear and tear on the joints, on the muscles, and stuff like that. In games now, it's relentless. Like, I don't know how close you sit to the pitch, Jimmy, but like if you actually get, like when you're sat at the back, like at a press box, you don't really get a grasp on how quick the game is. But then when you go pitch side, it's relentless. Like it's non-stop.
4 rows back.
Tiring.
It is. It's end-to-end stuff, really fast.
And when you get to sort of the major tournaments, or you watch the top teams, it's insane how quick everything is. It's a non-stop match of just movement and pressing and physical exhaustion. And I just wonder whether maybe the game has become so advanced now that it leaves players more susceptible to injury. I don't know. That's I've plucked that out of thin air and I'm throwing it out there. Because I don't know the answer to it, but I just wonder whether that's maybe plays a part.
No,
and that's why I also think I mean, look, this is controversial. I'm not against the 60-minute game with a stop clock stuff. I think that might actually work better than say 90 plus 10 extra minutes at the end of every half. I think we are in danger actually of play, and also there's too much football players.
That's your American sports fan coming out, though, isn't it?
A little bit, but do you know what? The NFL, they have 17 games, and it's a war. Like it's like being in a car crash every single week for those players. They need the rest of the week to recover, and they come back. They only play 17 games. In English football, you are playing. How can you play 3 games in a week at this intensity? How can you expect players to play 38 Premier League games or 46 EFL games and cups? And then there's 3 cup competitions if you're in your League 1 or League 2, because you've got the trophy. And then you've got Europe for the top teams, but they've got bigger squads, I guess. It just all seems like it's too much, and and I know people go, poor players, I've got a very hard job, and I get that. Like, I totally understand it. But if you want to see, let's say, I don't know, tell me, think of your favourite band, right? If you go and spend £100 on a ticket to see your favourite band, do you want them having done 2 gigs a day for the last 7 days? And then come in and knackered doing a gig for you? Or would you rather than do like 1 a week and come out and be brilliant? Like, I don't know. Like, it's performance. You're not going to perform at your best if you're tired. So, and I think we have to accept that they are in a different world. They're in a performance industry. And I think sort of we need to work out. But I say we need to work out. It'll never happen because the money's too good. Football. There'll be more football, not less. They're bringing in a massive World Club Cup competition to fill the summer soon, aren't they? And there's going to be more and more and more. So, Britain roll on the 60-man squad, I guess.
It's coming. Mark asks our final Ramblers question, which is, do you know anything about the new lad from Hamilton Academicals? This is the Ryan... I'm going to say One, because he's got a little fleck. He's spelt 1, but he's got a little fleck on the end, so I didn't know whether you knew anything about. I'd be more impressed if you know how to say his name than you actually know anything about him as a player.
Well, if he's got the accent on the letter, then yes, it will. I can. My mum was a language teacher, so I would think that that's correct. Although my French A level didn't do much good for me when I was in France last week. But then again, the French, like everywhere else, like you go you say something in French and they reply in English, and they just and it's almost dismissive. Like you also de baguette, s'il vous plaît, and they'll go, "Yep, that'll be 240, please." And that you just think, okay, right? I don't know whether you're just interested in equally speaking a different language, or whether you're just telling me to shut up. But no, I'm sorry. Like maybe this will reflect badly on me. I don't know. I was away last week. I've just got back from holiday. I was at a sports editors conference yesterday, and I was off today. Look after my little girl who's sick. So I apologize. I'm guarantee if Andy Giddings had Moxie here, they'd have definitely known everything about him. So I'm sorry.
Well, I'm more impressed, as I say, that you know how to pronounce Ryan One's name. So I'm good with that. So are we going to finish on? Do you think United have got enough to stay up, and do you think they will stay up? You've answered that already, which I'm delighted to hear. That confirms to anybody that's watching that you're a Blade. So I'm going to ask you to finish, Rob. Who do you think our best summer signing's been?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, I'm tempted to go with Harmer, because I know a Coventry fan, and he was saying all sorts like, this is the guy. He was reading off. I can't remember all the players that they've had over this. They've had like a bunch of players who are quite good, who've gone on to really, really big things. Obviously, the striker who's gone to Sport in Lisbon being one of them this summer. But he said that Harmer was better than all of them. Like he's the one player that they just absolutely adore at Coventry, and we're absolutely devastated to see him go. And I pay a lot of attention to that, and fans are devastated that a player's left. You kind of think there must be something there. I have seen a fair bit of him as well at Coventry, and I just think, when you see the goal he got, you just think there's a bit of quality here. There's just something that, for me, when he signed, I kind of just sat there and thought, I mean this in the nicest possible way, why is he just signed for one of the promoted teams? Like, why hasn't a team who is in the, a Brighton, for example? I don't think it's disrespectful to sort of say that right now, a Brighton or a Palace or somebody like that, I would have thought it'd be an ideal for them. So
Fulham, even somebody that's a little bit more established.
But more fool them, I guess. He's at Sheffield United now, so I think that's a fantastic signing. Archer's obviously come in and in one game has shown what he's all about. I love that celebration. Look, I just think the simplest celebrations, the better. His name is Cameron Archer, and he has an Archer celebration. So, as part of my, this is because I'm a bit of a sad act when it comes to England. Every single bloody, was it like 2 years that they have this European Championship thing where the under-21s playing it. I've watched it. I can remember when they had the massive penalty. It was like 2019 in penalties. They lost to Holland when Stuart Pearce was the manager, and watching us get spanked by Ozil and the Germans when we got to the final, and Joe Hart was in goal. And so I remember all of that stuff. And I was desperate to watch England win that under-21 tournament, and they did it this summer. And I watched as much as I could because it wasn't on British TV. But I thought when he played, he looked exciting, and I'm surprised that Aston Villa have let him out. So I guess, I'm going to the obvious two. That they're sort of the players that I would go for off the top of my head. But I think United have had a good summer. They've not spent ridiculous money on players who may or may not work. And if the absolute worst case happens, this is the bedrock and foundation of a squad that should be right up there again. But as I've already said, I think you will find that Sheffield United, I think, are going to be okay. And I apologise to any Sheffield United fans if I'm wrong, and if you feel that that's me tempting fate and blowing it. Burnley just look, for all the stuff about Burnley, they look poor.
Absolutely, they do. It's the company thing. I appreciate I'm talking to a media man, but it's the media darling in Vincent Kompany, where these big sort of mainstream media outlets think because he's potentially going to be the eventual successor to Pep, that he is the next coming and all this sort of thing. But
here's something about him, yeah. He doesn't do interviews with the local media. So if he will do like 5 Live, let's say, and if they're not there, if they're not interested in an interview, then local BBC radio don't get anything from him. And when I heard that, I thought, you know, you're the Burnley boss, mate. You know that you're not Pep yet. So, and he had him in. Like, I thought this was a good thing at first, but now I'm starting to think maybe they're just really tired, because he got them in like a week after the season finished for pre-season. Like the other teams were still playing. I think the playoffs had happened yet, and they're all back in pre-season training at Burnley, and they've started the season and they look dreadful. And then, you know, Luton, I think we always felt Luton were going to find it tough.
Yeah.
Everton looked like an absolute abomination.
Yeah, they do. Wolves.
And we're lucky to get a point, I thought, at the Lane at the end. Wolves, Bournemouth.
I think it's a league of 6. We've talked about this a lot. I think there's 6 fairly below average teams, and we're in that. Don't get me wrong, but I think we've enough. I think we've enough.
And could Forest end up? I mean, look, Forest might end up. I don't know. Maybe Forest have signed enough to sort of think they're going to be okay, but they might still end up coming back into that as well. So I think you know, I think a lot of the media predictions were like United, you know, they'll go down with Luton and all this, and you know, I'm not. There's just something. Listen, Paul Heckingbottom and his staff. There's just something there. You know, you can see it sometimes. There's just something there. And look, when you've dealt with enough managers over the years, you sometimes just get to the point where you think, yeah, do you know what? This is a great fit. And when Michael Duff was at Barnsley last year, you thought this is a great fit, and it really worked. And I'm surprised that it started badly for him at Swansea, because I thought this is a manager destined for the top. And with Heckingbottom, it's just that from that first press conference he had when he came back as manager, I thought it was one of the best press conferences I've ever heard. He was just such the clarity and the determination and the vision that he painted in that press conference set the tone for the next 18 months, which led to Sheffield United being back in the Premier League. So, you know, brilliantly supported by Stuart McCall and Jack Lester and the rest of the backroom team. There's so much spirit and character. And look, the Lane's a fantastic place. You know, that a big game at the Lane. You know, you can have your Old Traffords and you can have your Stamford Bridge stuff. Give me the Lane on a Tuesday night with a big club there. You know, United full capacity. You know, Chip Butty song to kick the game off. That's what football's about. That to me it's a special environment. So there are going to be. This was the other thing, is we would talk about this in the office in the summer. Everyone goes, "Oh, you know, you're going to beat the Everton's a must-win game." Yeah, whatever. Like, do you know what I think might be the best thing for United? Are playing the Chelseas and the Man Uniteds at Bramall Lane.
I agree.
Because I think they'll turn up and they'll be like, don't really fancy this, and get turned over. And I think Everton come in and they go, crap, we need to get something here. This is you know, they take it very, very seriously, this game. This could be a season decider, even, you know, this early for Everton as much as it is for United. There's a tension there. But Man U will roll into town. Oh, we're Man United. Or we're Chelsea. We've got a set. We've signed 70 players. We're Chelsea. Yeah, you know, we've spent £1 billion, and they turn up and they're just not on it. And United are. So look, I think there ain't gonna be a lot of teams parking up at the Lane and looking forward to that. So I think that.
I think there's a lot to be said for. Yeah, I agree, and I think there's a lot to be said for United upping the levels when they need to as well. I think we match the opposition in a lot of games. It's very rare that we're beaten by a lot. You know, there's not usually a big margin between the games. So I genuinely believe, like, Lincoln was a disappointment. I don't think we played to the levels we should have been doing. But like you say, come Man United, Man City, we put in a terrific performance against City. Just the tactics of Eki and things like that. So, yeah, I'm in total agreement, Rob, and you won't get any disagreements from me that there's nowhere like the Lane. So thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. Thank you for your time and your insight. I've really enjoyed it. So, yeah, I just want to say thank you very much. It's been much appreciated.
No, thank you for the invitation, and anytime. Loved it and happy to do it.
So how about that? Rob Staton, what a fantastic interview. And thank you again to Rob for his time. Really appreciate it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below. Do you agree with some of Rob's assessments of the season? I thought he had some really interesting stories there as well as to what he's witnessed in his time in the local region and outside of that as well. So thanks again to Rob for coming on. If you do like what we're doing on the channel, please do like, comment, but subscribe. That's the main thing. We're trying to get to 5K before Christmas Day. We're in double digits now, getting towards 3,000, but we're just continuing to grow all the time. So if you can, please do subscribe. It'd be very much appreciated. But for now, come on, you red and white wizards. Up the blades. Ramble on.